I've learned through my work. For example, if I sit down and I think, right, I'm doing this chapter and I'm doing that or whatever, then if I start to have a different, interesting idea about something, I trust myself now to go with that idea because it will actually bear loads more fruit. So that's what I mean about trusting myself in general, because this journey of sort of realizing you know more than you thought you did.
Thomas Edison, Richard Branson, John F. Kennedy, Mozart, Michael Jordan, Will Smith. That sounds like a list of highly successful titans in a variety of vocations. Why is it that we rarely hear that they have or had ADHD? And you know what we hear even less about? Serena Williams, Emma Watson, Mel Robbins, Whoopi Goldberg, Agatha Christie, Erin Brockovich, Cher. Yeah, the successful women navigating ADHD. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, a lifelong student, now a coach. I'm also the creator of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, a system that helps people like you figure out what they should do with their life. And we're here today to talk ADHD, your strengths, your symptoms, your workarounds, and how you proudly stand out instead of trying to fit in. I credit my ADHD for some of my greatest gifts. And you know what? I spy a happier life for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for episode number 221 of ADHD for Smartass Women. I hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and our newsletter over at tracyotsuka.com. My purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. In the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something. Not one. So, of course, I am delighted to introduce you today to Amelia Etherton. Amelia is a freelance editor, writer, and B&B owner living in Ireland. She has worked on travel magazines, in education, and for museums before being headhunted to become a nonfiction children's editor. She grew up in London, but when she was 18, she moved to Florence to study and work without knowing a word of Italian or anyone in Florence. 20 years ago, she moved with her husband and 3-year-old daughter from London to a beautiful but remote part of Ireland, which she now sees was an incredibly ADHD decision. When her daughter left home, Amelia began working on an MA in creative writing for children and passed with distinction. She's written 2 novels for young adults, a radio play, and lots of poetry. She speaks Italian and French, Irish, though it needs improving, and has just started to learn Ukrainian. Amelia's 2 children are now 25, that's her daughter, and 20, that's her son. She was recently diagnosed with inattentive ADHD at 57 and has found that understanding her brain has been brilliant in helping her work with rather than against herself. Amelia, did I get all of that right?
You did, Tracy. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, Amelia, since I know you've been listening to this podcast, you know what our plan is, that we always talk about the ADHD diagnosis first. So could we start with that?
Yes. Well, I think the circumstances, the way how it happened was, I think I had a perfect storm of menopause and second child leaving home and my brother sadly dying and just an awful lot going on. Yeah, thank you. And I think I was getting this real brain fog as well. And I started to think I had early onset dementia. So I actually thought I'm going to write a book about this. And I was I have half convinced I had that. And then I started I started doing all the research on that, and I started writing a novel about it. And then I started listening to your podcast, and everything kind of fell into place completely. And then I suppose I've been waiting for the diagnosis for quite a long time, but then I basically got officially diagnosed quite recently, only about a month ago. And I knew sort of from a while back for sure, sort of, and everything. So that's kind of how it happened, I think.
So can you tell us, what was your childhood like? Did you have ADHD symptoms that you recall when you were a kid?
Well, my mother always used to say I was very vague, and which is, I always grew up thinking, oh yes, I'm kind of vague and daydreamy, and but also she used to kind of liken me to my grandmother, which is her mother-in-law, and she sort of, would say was scatty, but she also really didn't like my grandmother. So that was always quite hard, because I knew, I'm like her, and mum sort of absolutely hates it, that kind of a way. So that was a sort of, those kinds of, probably I picked up a lot of negative, among other things, kind of messages there. But sort of at school and things, I was always doodling, I think, to concentrate, and I was a real sort of bookworm, daydream. Yeah, I just lived in books and things. And yeah, it didn't get difficult.
Did you do?
Yeah.
Did you do well in school, or was school difficult for you?
Well, I did well to begin with, because I was sort of, I read very early, and then they moved me up a class. And even though I was really terrible at maths, I think because I sort of had the reading and all of that, but I was so much younger than everybody else in my class, and I was really tiny. So it meant that kind of sports and things like that, and I was such a late developer that I think it wasn't a great idea to sort of have moved me up. I enjoyed school and I had good friends, and then until sort of puberty, I don't think it was too difficult. But then when it came to exams and revising, I mean, there was no way I would sit down and revise. So that became tricky, and I left school without many good. Well, I had decent enough. I was okay in all the exams you didn't have to revise for, but yes, I could, it was, I left school without the good enough A-levels probably for university. But then I was working, I did lots of jobs, and different jobs. And then, but it was really, the thing that really got me going was the boredom of these jobs that I was doing, because I did a secretarial course, and it was, I suppose, had all these creepy bosses, and it was, really, really boring work for me. So I think that spurred me to, just make a change. And I saw an ad in a newspaper and thought, right, that looks great. I think I'm going to try to do that. And so I went to it.
Okay, hold on 1 second. So I have a couple questions before we get too far. You used the term, your mom said that you were vague. What does that mean? That's not a word we use. I mean, vague, of course, is a word, but it's not really a word we use to describe a person, unless they're talking and they're unclear and yeah.
Yeah. And really, I suppose in a funny way, I'm not as a person too vague, actually, because I think being an editor, you have to be so clear. But I think she meant it as a sort of, well, you're so dreamy, and sort of, you're not all there, as in the sense that if somebody spoke to you, you'd have been daydreaming, really. So I think she meant it that way. But I just, how you remember words from the past, I always remember that.
Yeah, especially when they're not positive, right?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, those are the things you remember. Yeah.
So did you have other siblings?
Yes, I'm in the middle of 4. So yes.
Okay. And so did you feel like you were treated differently than the other siblings, that there was just something different about you, or?
It's interesting because since I've found out about me, I've thought so much about my family, and that's been very difficult because you get a bit of grief over it, because unfortunately both my brothers died, and But I do think that, Tracy, that my brother just below me was inattentive like me, and we were in the middle. And I think he was so daydreamy and he was so brilliant and talented. Well, he was just very musical, and his whole, but he was that quieter kind of thing. I think I was very similar to him. And my other two siblings were noisy and kind of, somehow, just busier or something. So I very much feel that he was undiagnosed, and I have a grief over the fact of that, because he then suffered with schizophrenia and things, and so it's a sad thing. So it's funny when you can look back and you can see this and you can think, and I also think my mother was the hyperactive impulsive sort of person, and she would have been fascinated, and I wanted to talk to her so much about this, and I can't because she's dead, but it's that thing. It's interesting. It's sort of an interesting kind of feeling of also becoming closer to them because of understanding more,
Yeah. So you think you likely got your ADHD from your mom?
I think so, but it could easily have been. Well, I think it was both of them. I think my dad too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was so curious and interested in everything, and had such sort of knowledge of everything. He was that sort of a person. So I don't know. Yeah, it could easily been both of them. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so you also talked about exams and school, and you used the term revise. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, studying. I think you say studying, being able to get down and study. And I think we say, revising for exams, where you've got to go over things and learn them off. I think I struggled with that working. Was it the working memory, the sort of thing of the linear thing of putting it all together, perhaps some of that processing stuff that I had difficulty with. But it wasn't, it's hard to know. But I think it was really just getting down to it.
So actually starting to do the work.
Yeah.
The homework.
Yes.
So in school, it sounds like you were fine when you weren't daydreaming, when you were interested.
Yes.
But then it was getting the homework done.
Yeah.
That was the problem.
I think it was.
Studying
and
for exams.
Becoming a bit bored by, once that sort of adolescence came, I think a boredom with what was going on at school, and much more interest in what was going on outside school, and perhaps that sort of thing. So it didn't. I'd lost interest in the learning, which was very interesting, because it then all came back, that interest in learning, after I became very bored doing these other jobs when I left, because I actually had sort of 3 years, because I left at 16 after my A levels, which is that last sort of stuff you do at school, in the UK. And then it took me, I had a few years where I was doing jobs that I really didn't like, and I started to think I would much prefer to probably go to university,
So interesting how that happens, huh?
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. It doesn't look so bad then.
Yes.
So at 18, you see an ad in a newspaper? Is that where it was?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about that.
So I think it was just in the newspaper at home that used to get delivered. And I think there was an ad, somebody looking for an au pair in Florence, and also an ad. No, it was an ad actually for this institute in Florence where you could go and do an A level. But I got in contact with them, and they had people who wanted au pairs. So I was able to go and have a job and somewhere to live. But I knew I didn't know any Italian, and I didn't know anybody there, but somehow it did sort of work out. I mean, I really kind of fell in love with, I think it was being in the Renaissance, I just thought I was in the Renaissance, walking around these buildings and things. It was just amazing.
Okay. So just so our listeners know, Amelia sent me an email, and I'm not going to read the whole email, but it's okay if I read part of it, right, Amelia?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that everybody's on the same page and we know why you're here. This is part of the email that Amelia sent me. Dear Tracy, I don't know how many times I've thought about writing to you and then bottling out. But I promised myself at New Year that every day I would do either a kind or a brave thing. That's a really, I love that. I love that idea, and starting in the new year. So for my bravery, here goes. Then you go into a full paragraph full of gold stars for me, talking about how you've listened to the podcast for the last 2 years and the benefits of it. So thank you. And then you say, I wanted to write to ask you to do some shows featuring older women. One thing that can hit us later diagnosed women is the sense of grief that can threaten to overwhelm us. The feeling for me that it was so hard to bring up my kids mostly alone and without knowing we were all neurodivergent. The grief hasn't overwhelmed me, but there have been some moments. I think it would really help older women to see themselves in a guest of yours, even to know that you can have a whole life without knowing this, but somehow succeed, and then have fun with all the time that's left. That's my plan anyhow. And so I responded to Amelia and said, Amelia, what if you were that older woman who would come on my podcast? You have so much to say, and I know our listeners would love you. So can you talk a little bit about that and what changed once you were diagnosed? Because I think that's probably when you experienced most of the grief. Is that true?
Yes. Well, actually, I suppose it's been, because the official one was recent, but I suppose I've been thinking about it for the last, however long it is. But so I suppose it was just I would keep going. You'd cycle slightly through something. You'd start thinking about what I was saying about my family and how I'd love to have talked to them about this, and that they would have actually really understood in some ways. And it's just that connection. And I think also, yes, you think about, the things of parenting that might have been easier if you hadn't had to have, if you'd understood that this is a brain difference, and you could have got more support, because I've got some brilliant support now. But I think, so it's things like that. But what did you say specifically? It was I think, you were saying what's changed since the diagnosis, really, weren't you?
Yeah.
I think,
yeah.
I mean, what's changed is, I suppose it's, what was I thinking? Really new ways, I think, of knowing how to kind of take care of myself, and a kind of real sense of being allowed to take up a space in the world, and just all of this, being able to find help, really. I've had a wonderful coach who is called Maria, and she sends me recordings of our sessions, and they've been they've been a real revelation, because it's so odd to hear yourself working through things and recognize that you've had some insights, and that you're not, it's actually just the feeling of thinking, I'm not as stupid as I tell myself I am in some ways underneath it all, and so that's been huge, really, I think. So, I mean,
can I ask you, Amelia, when you say I'm not as stupid as I thought I was, underneath all that, telling yourself I'm stupid, was there always a question like, wait a minute, I'm not really stupid. Look, I've done this, and look, I've done that, and look what this person says. And do you know what I'm saying? And look, I got through my MA with, brilliant grades. How can I be stupid? So this consistent inconsistency.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You sort of, I think it's just, it's within me, the two things. And it's this disjunct or a disconnect between sort of knowing that you can do this and then thinking, but then perhaps it's not true, or perhaps I've faked that or something, or, there's the stupid voice that says,
I'm delusional.
Yes, I'm delusional. Yeah. So that's why when I've listened back to those recordings with my coach, that's been so helpful, because I can hear, no, you don't sound stupid to me, actually, kind of, I can tell myself, I can hear it.
Yeah.
So I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's been really, really good for me, that because and obviously all the things that you learn about how it's the brain and our strengths, and then where it is where it's a bit harder for us, but it's not to do with our intelligence in any way,
Yeah.
So,
And isn't that one of the main reasons, women, especially older, and I'll say older,
yes.
anything over like 45, which to me is not older at all, but whatever, midlife, I would say, and later. What the hell was I going to say? I can't even remember where I was going.
I reckon.
I know what it is.
Yeah. Sorry.
They ask me all the time, should I get diagnosed? And my thought is always, well, I can't tell you what to do, but if it were me, I would certainly get diagnosed, because once we realize that we have a different brain, that means we might struggle in some ways and around certain things that involve, for example, our executive functions, planning, scheduling, motivation, emotion, maybe. But that's how our brain works, right? It's neurobiology. It's not character or a moral failing. And so then we understand that we have truly done the best that we possibly could under the circumstances.
Yeah.
And then that also, I think, and you alluded to that, it allows us to be kinder, not only to ourselves, but also to our parents, if we at any time thought that maybe they didn't do everything that they should have done, right? That, maybe they, could have, taken some parenting classes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we're all doing the very best we can. And of course, for those of us who have more privilege, it's easier. I mean, it's as simple as that. But I mean, we really are, with what we've been given.
Exactly.
And, we're doing the best we can. And so much of it is environment, right? Being around the people who love us exactly the way we are.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? And I think if you can sort of find those people, then that's such a key to it working out well, and I think that's, very, very important, isn't it, really, that people, accept you.
So can I ask you, when you are feeling this grief, because I'm assuming that it's not all completely gone, right? There are times when it comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to know, what do you do to help yourself feel better? Do you have like a plan or a process or anything?
Yes. I mean, I've got lots of things, I suppose. I think one of the things is turning it into my work, if you know what I mean, because anything big, well, really it's doing journaling, which I've done for years. And because I find that if I just put all that worry and upset and stuff onto paper with the messiest writing imaginable, and because I'm doing it as fast as my brain is going, through all of that speedy brain. And then by about 2 or 3 pages in, I've started to go, oh, well, you could do this, or I think I might do that. And immediately that's action, and that's things that I think, well, I can do this about this situation, or this is how I understand it now, But when it's all just in your head, it's so impossible to deal with, because it's just loads of different thoughts spiraling around. And so the grief as well has been a bit like that. It's sort of, I've needed to just think about it and talk to friends, but really good friends and stuff. But I think that sort of, although that was what was difficult to begin with, because friends who've known me for years, they'd say, but you're fine as you are, and why would you want to get diagnosed really? And do you really need to, it's sort of, and that was a bit hard because I was understanding more and more about it, but I wasn't able to articulate what it felt like and what I understood well enough, and I think that's, and the stigma side of it, because people would have a certain idea about what it was. And so I think that compounded the sort of grief in a way, because I understood that things could have been a bit different about certain things. It could have been easier in this place and that. And then I also, when I was talking to close friends, they weren't probably understanding, what it was, but that feels so much better now, I think. because I've come through, I feel like I understand it better, and I feel like I'm beginning to be able to talk about it more easily. And I mean, something like this is amazing. I would never have thought I'd do something like come on here and be this is more because I'm very a private, kind of more person. So it's sort of, it's all a process, isn't it? I think.
So it sounds like your big strategy was basically taking the grief and, how would I phrase this? And basically enveloping your creative around it.
Yeah.
And
so
that
really helps.
I'm curious, while you were writing about it, what were you thinking? Was the idea just to get it all out, or was the idea to kind of answer some questions for yourself, around why did you do whatever you did? What don't you want? What do you want? Were you processing it? Were you doing all of these things?
I think I was doing all of those things. I mean, I've got a Post-it above my computer that says misery and an arrow and then art and curiosity. And it's as though, so
what does that mean?
Well, to me, it just means something. It just means that if I'm really down and I'm feeling grief over the family members that have died, and the sense, then I can make that into art because what happens is, as I say, like I basically, when I've been doing journaling for a bit, if I've been sort of writing out all the things that I'm, unhappy, sad about or whatever, then by the end of that, they're out, and what a relief. And then I always start, thinking about the ideas in my books, or I start getting fun ideas once I've got everything out, once I've got out the sort of the worries and that kind of thing, then it frees me up, and it's sort of, so that literally is misery, becomes art. And and so it does seem to really work for me, that and then of course you get the dopamine from the having fun ideas, so I suppose it just really
so
works.
What you're doing though is you are definitely acknowledging the grief. You're not just tamping it down, ignoring it, the toxic positivity. You're fine. You're good. Chin up. Yeah. You're really going into it.
Yes.
In your writing.
Yeah.
Ah.
And I think I've always been like that. I mean, it's that intensity that we have as ADHDers. I think I have my best friend, we have what's called our chat-a-thons, and they just go on for days on end, really. So, and we're always looking to find out the sort of truth of something. You're looking to, you just keep on, working something out, I suppose. And I think that's something that helps in novel writing, because it's always about finding that, so I think there's a lot in that.
So you're definitely using your grief to create art. And my thought right now is, I always talk about our best purposes give meaning to our past, which you're clearly doing, right? You're taking what has happened and using it to fuel you to, I'm assuming the thought is to help other people through your writing?
Yes. It feels very like that.
Help yourself too.
Yes. But no, for sure, because I think, I write for young adults, which is that really intense age, of coming of age, and sort of young teens really as well. And I think it's that sort of, I think for me, books, really brought me up. I think they matter so much to me, and they, and I think they matter to, a lot of children, and it's sort of, they really can help you in the same way that, the journaling thing helps, actually sort of entering into that world in your head, which is your world, that you've made by reading fiction. It's sort of, it's the, it's not like anything else. And I think it just, children's books, for me, they're so amazing because they always have hope in them, which is something which adult books just don't have to have, but children's books have to have that. And so it's,
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
But you're so right.
Yeah, they're really
Huh.
responsible children's authors. They sort of, and also I think it's that thing where, of course, you enter so many different worlds, which gives you as a child, if you're going through anything difficult, you can just enter this other world and it gives you the sense that there are other ways to live. So if you're in a difficult place, you could just pick up a book and realize, but so-and-so's managed to do this. And, there are just gives you all that sense of possibility and agency, because they're always, it's always those characters, main characters always have agency. So it's always helped me. And so I love to write for that age group because, because I feel like it's a really vivid, wonderful, it's a vivid time, really.
Well, and all your wisdom that you can then impart on young adults who, I remember, being that age and thinking that something would happen and it would literally be the end of the world. And then the next day I couldn't even remember it. But when you're in it, you just feel like it's everything and it will always be everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's so like that, isn't it? And also, whether it's all that time of first things, isn't it? First love, first sort of everything that you do. So it's very, it's pretty intense. But it's really interesting.
So I'm curious, you talk a lot about, taking the past and weaving it into your art. I'm curious what you do about the present, because we can't change, right? What happened in the past.
Yeah.
We can only change today, tomorrow, now.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, is there any thought process that you go through to make sure that, well, for example, I think it's Sarah Saline, she had this, it actually wasn't her quote. It was from The Lion King. And I don't know I don't know that I've even seen The Lion King. I know my kids have a million times, and I've probably been sitting there but not paying attention because I don't like animated movies. Unless they're really, really good. Like, what was the one? I think it was called Up or...
Oh, yes, Up. I loved Up, actually.
Was that the one at the end where they're saying it's just a home? It was during the time it was like 2008, 2009, when everybody was losing their home here in the United States. Yeah. Was that the movie Up?
I think so, with the little scout boy and the sort of and the older man. Yeah, that was kind of that was I cried in Up, I think. Yeah.
Totally. But it was so good because it was literally, this is stuff. It's just a house. It's not a home, I think was the message. But anyway, in this movie, I think it's the wild boar. He says, most people say, put the past behind you. And what this character says is, you got to put your behind in the past.
Oh, yes. Meaning, that's right.
Meaning, okay, put the behind in the past, but then you need to be in the present, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious how you weave that into your thought process when you're working through grief. Or do you?
So what do you mean that sort of, how do you think about does it help you think about the present and the future, do you mean? Or...
Right, because if we're just stuck in the past, then we feel no agency, right? Like these things happen to us, nothing's going to get better. Look at what's been in the past.
Yes. Well, I suppose there are bits of my characters that, are people from then, and there's something about, you've transmuted it really already by, they're never exactly that person, but they're bits of that. And then there's something, I think you can put it all you're able to sort of put it to rest when you've done that with it, really, when you've written things into a story. It's just a very, I don't know what it's like, but it's soothing. I don't know what it does. It has a kind of balm to it, just doing that, I think. But what was I thinking? The thing of, think this is relevant, that thing to do with, say, it struck me just the other day anyway, that, for example, I thought, if I hadn't gotten the diagnosis, because I'm around quite a lot of people who are aging, you know, in their 80s and stuff. And I find myself very much thinking that wouldn't that be, you can think, oh, you're too old to sort of get diagnosed now. But actually, you know, aging is quite a hard thing for people to do and to go through. And there's so many things to do, the executive function, like the memory and the the sort of vulnerability, really, and the sort of, so it just really made me think that, you know, I'm sure this is relevant to what we were saying, but I don't know, maybe it's gone. But you'd really rather know now so that you can help yourself with, you know, for later on, for you know, if you have a nice long life, it's just sort of, but it's definitely relevant to what you're saying. I think it's to do with the future, yes, and sort of I suddenly had a sense of what the future would be, with the fact of if you being able to work on some of these things of yours and understand them better. You know, it makes complete sense. We should all understand ourselves well just for life, you know, but there is something about, I think it's because I'm around people, you know, I've got a great friend who's 85, so I know some of the difficulties, and I think, gosh, I need to know that I'm not entirely prepared for all of it, but at least, because it's a lot of, you know, there can be a lot of rumination on all your ailments. There can be all of that sort of thing. And therefore, like, doesn't it make a lot of sense to think about just to do the bit of work on yourself now? Because I think that's, you know, it's a tough one it's the stress that I see elderly people, the stress of, you know, the worrying, my memory, my whatever. So, you know, the fact that that's why I understand them so well, because I've had memory problems all my life. So it's that sort of, you know, I am always losing, forgetting, So I can really empathize with them. But I also think it's just made me realize, God, I want to sort of accept myself with this, but also just be able to work on it. I think you can work on memory all your life, you know.
Absolutely. Especially now that we know that there's neuroplasticity. Our brains are not set in stone, you know, from the time we're born. There's so much we can do. And that is, again, speaking of, you know, you've used the word a couple times, I think now, hope, right? We all need hope. And when we think it's all done and there's nothing we can do, no wonder we don't want to get out of bed, versus if there's just an inkling of hope. I think we are, by nature, optimistic people who believe that for whatever reason, no matter how many times we've been shot down, hey, if anybody can do it, I can do it, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think, and that's slightly why I think I write YA as well, because it's like the coming of age thing. And I think we just, maybe ADHD people, we just keep, as you say, we have a new, you know, we keep coming of age a bit. You keep sort of like those things. It doesn't just happen once.
Right. Right. So I'm curious, how did your kids handle your diagnoses?
Oh, wow. Yes. Well, they've been great about it, both of them, and so supportive and things. But they've gotten a little bit bored as well of me going, you know, because I was going on about it too much. So there was that. So I was just talking to my son before I came on, and he, you know, is just full of the pep talk and whatever. But I think, and it's the thing that's been very interesting to me is my daughter hasn't had a diagnosis yet, but she thinks she has the hyperactive impulsive type, and she's so found exercise as the way that regulated her, you know, and I think they I feel so even closer to her really now. We've always had long chats and gone really deep into psychology together. I don't know, we just do. And she always wants to find out more about how things work for her. But I think it's just something about, there's just more understanding I just can understand more about, you know, how it works for her. And I feel, of course you feel bad. You think, oh, I wish I'd known, because I could have, you know, understood this and that in her teens, but also it is like we did our best. I think we definitely did our best and tried. I think we're so hard on ourselves, mothers are, but it's just, I think it's lovely now. It's absolutely lovely now, the sort of way we can sort of this understanding's really changed things. Yeah.
So it's interesting, though. Ultimately, where you've ended up is that you have a really great relationship with your kids.
Yeah.
But what happens is you go back into the times when maybe the relationship wasn't so great. And so that's where the grief comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of that sort of, that's where it was. I think it's changed because I think I'm feeling, but I suppose, yes, a year ago or so when I was just realizing it, I very much thought, I felt so, I felt a lot of grief over that very difficult time when you've got someone, we triggered each other. We sort of, we wound each other up about the things that were, because my being forgetful and, not on the case as mother. And she's not like that, but she's still also really time blind. And so we'd miss the school bus every single morning. So I'd be driving across the mountain to school, half the time or halfway to school. And so we're literally missing the bus. And and it's so funny how different they are, because our son would never miss the bus, but his he would just get there with nothing. He would have nothing because he was so desperate not to miss things, not to be on time. It's a kind of, two completely different ways of going about it, but neither way is particularly great. So kind of,
You also told me a story about your son and what happened when he switched schools. We had been mentioning at the beginning, or we said at the beginning how important the environment is. And so I'd love for you to tell that story.
Well, I suppose what happened was he was having a really hard time at school. Obviously, the ADHD had really kicked in, and whilst he was diagnosed when he was 9, I didn't put him on again. That was I've thought afterwards why not. I didn't put him on medication, but there was no information at the time, and I suppose he was so kind of happy in himself that we just thought, we didn't realize that about it and things. So we just supported him as much as we could. And then, but by the stage of sort of about, 12 and 13, he was having a hard time at school. And I think he was just becoming, he was having a really hard time, and there was bullying and things. And then what happened was we went and looked at this other school, and he said, yes, he wanted to go. And so he went, and he was about 15, and he absolutely loved it. And it was a school, just all boys, but they, then half of them were really into rugby in the class, which wasn't him. And half of them were into everything else, really. And then he fitted into that, or, sort of really well. And it was a very really changed things completely for him. And there was this one day I'll never forget when he'd started doing portraits of the boys, and he can get a likeness just quite quickly and easily and everything. And they said, and they started paying him, bits of money for this. And that was amazing because, your peers are giving you money and things. Then one day they put all the pictures up that he'd done of the people in the dorm, and they sort of in secret. And when he came in, they said, this is your gallery, this is kind of your art gallery now and things. And it was just, so he just sort of really, everything kind of changed, and he realized what it was he wanted to do as well. So you're so lucky when you find your purpose at that age, but he absolutely has. And so then he decided, and again, it's kind of interesting because that school, they, a lot of the boys, he realized, were all going to be doing those very traditional professions. They were going to go into lawyers and doctors and accountants and things. And he thought, I'm not like that. And he thought, I'm going to come back and go back to the school I was at, where there's a great, lovely art teacher. And he thought, and I'm going to do art, and I'm just going to work towards that. And so that's what he did. And then during that pandemic year, one of the pandemic, he entered a competition with this oil painting that he'd done, and he won that national art competition, and so that opened so many doors for him as well with getting into art school. So yeah, but it was hyper focus. I mean, I just can remember so vividly just the feeling of him being in his room, and he would be humming while he was painting, and just going back to it, and then coming away and going back to it, and how it was taking shape, and just being in the zone, being so in the zone, really.
Yeah. So where is he now?
He's studying animation in England. In Hertfordshire.
The one thing that I said I don't like, right? Animated movies.
But I think you probably like, there's so many different types, Tracy. Yeah, there's so many.
True. And oh my gosh, if you are an artist and a creative, which most of us are, although everything I draw turns out to look like a pig.
Same here.
I bet that is the best job ever.
Really fun. Yeah, really fun. I mean, he's now doing comics more actually. So it's comics and concept art is what it's called. So, but you know what? That's all story as well. So I just have the best fun conversations with him about the stories he's doing. And he discovered as well, he said, oh God, I just love the story side of it. And you know what? He wouldn't read when he was young, or he didn't read too much, but I read to him because I just wouldn't let him, I don't know, I just sort of read to him because I knew he liked it really. He did. Yeah. We sort of had I read to him for a long, long time. And that is one of those things that, that was nice.
Well, that's a wonderful story. And it mirrors my son's almost. I'm not sure that Marcus.
Yeah. Yeah. When you talk about your son. Yeah. Similar.
I don't think Marcus has found his real thing yet. He's exploring a lot of things. It's not like with your son where he can say, okay, it's got to be around art. And some of the things that he loved, his passions like music, he still listens to a lot of music. He likes music, but for whatever reason, he has no interest in actually making that a career, even though it got him, into the university he's at. So Marcus actually is now in Prague studying for his, I guess, second semester junior year. And so my husband and I and my daughter are going to fly out and meet him. And we were in April, I think, and we were planning to go to Morocco. But the layovers, I've never been to Morocco, and I don't know why, but I really want to go.
I really want to go there too,
That was the plan, but the layovers from Prague are just way too long. There's nothing even remotely direct, and we're not going to be there that long, so it just doesn't make sense. So literally yesterday, we've been trying to figure out where else could we go, and we've been toying with the idea of Copenhagen or Dubrovnik, Oslo, or someplace in Ireland, literally yesterday. No. And so when I started to do the research to prepare for this podcast, I'm like, wait a minute. Amelia's in Ireland and she has this B&B. I need to know more about it. So tell me about this B&B. Where is it? And what made you do this? Because it's in a remote area, right?
It is, yes. No, it's our website is a little bit clunky and blooming well needs a lot of work, but it's it is on we're very close to the sea, and it's in Kerry, southwest Ireland. So yes, it's sort of near enough to the Skelligs where Star Wars was filmed and all of that kind of thing. But that's actually not open really in April. But yes, it's very beautiful. It's mountains and sea, and that's really what it's what it's like, the landscape and things. It's very rugged and lovely. Yeah.
So in the little, I don't know, is it a village or is it a town where your cottage is?
It's a village, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, how many residents are in that village?
Oh gosh, that is one of those typical questions that I can't answer.
I mean, is it really tiny? Is it medium or is it big?
No, it is really tiny, but it's that thing where I'm very bad on kind of statistics and things. So
remembering them, me too.
Yes. So
I can't even remember how many people are in the town I live in. I don't know if it's 8,000. or
Yeah,
800?
yeah.
I know it's little.
Yeah. Well, this probably is even way littler because when you think about the school would have had 40 children in it only. And that's the whole primary school. So that's from age 4 to 12. So 40 kids it shows that the community is pretty small. It is really small.
And so do you feel like this is your home? You totally belong here. You love it. Or do you feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere?
Well, it's so very interesting you say that because I think about that a lot. And I am a bit sort of in two places because I'm partly, I still feel partly English. I mean, but here is also, I'm very at home. But yes.
Do you live full time in Ireland or are you in the UK a bit?
Well, I'm going back to the UK for sort of stretches at the moment because of both the children having left home and my husband works away for long periods of time. So it does mean, yes, that I just need the stimulation really of going and seeing the old friends.
So do you think you'll retire in Ireland, in the stone cottage?
Well, yes.
If you
no.
ever,
Again,
and when I say
know.
retire, saying that to an ADHD person is ridiculous. You will probably never retire.
Exactly.
But is the plan to stay there forever? Is this your forever place?
Gosh. I don't think so. I think maybe not because of the fact that actually but it's really hard to know how we'll all feel. But I think for me, it's a sense perhaps of not wanting to it's hard to say. I think some of me does belong in London still as well. So it's actually hard. Yeah.
Where is your daughter?
She's in London, you see. And yeah. And and my son is very close to there. So it may, we'll see.
So he's in London too?
He's very close to London. He's only half an hour away.
Wow. Okay. So yes, our situations are very similar.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Really.
I mean, I don't think that where I live it's not as remote at all because we're 45 minutes from San Francisco and there's, the closest town is probably 60,000 residents. It's 5 minutes away, but we live in the country. And so when I go when I go to New York City to go visit the kids who both live there, Marcus is still in school. Taya, is in her first job, just the energy there. And I'm like, I don't know if I can stay in this little dinky town.
Yeah. But is it hard for you? I'm sure it isn't for you, but I find now because it's so quiet where I am and it's wonderful, that peace. But then when I go back to London, I'm quite overwhelmed for the first few days, by the noise and the just the general sort of chaos. I can't seem to process, what's around me so easily. I mean, I do get used to it, but it's that overstimulus thing, it's
So Amelia, I'm not inattentive. I am really hyperactive. And so that might be the difference. Yes. And so it's almost like I thrive on that stimulation. Like I need that. The problem is when I think about, so we live on 6.5 acres and it's just physically so beautiful where we live that when I think about, okay, moving, because this house is too big, but to move, I would be in some little residential neighborhood with, a little postage stamp backyard. And I don't know that I could do that. But if something were to happen to my husband, I would be screwed because there is so much work here. And, certain times of the year, you know how it is.
Exactly. We're the same, actually. We've got quite a big garden, so it requires a lot of, attention.
And I would love, the neighbors are so spread out here. I would love to have neighbors right next door like we used to have.
Yes.
But I want land around me. So the whole thing doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I don't know how, this is going to work.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's it. And I think there's a little bit to do with the sort of regulating of stimulus or something, because I am like you in that I really love the excitement of it all as well. But it's just how you regulate. And then I need enough stimulus here. I need enough ways of finding fun here, which isn't always straight that easy to find. I have to work at that to find the fun of here. Whereas when I'm in London, it's art galleries and museums and, and things and loads of people to go and see that I haven't seen for ages. And, so it's just kind of regulating, working out how to work when I'm there, which I find quite difficult, and how to have the fun little sort of, some fun when I'm here, really. A bit more fun.
Do you have really good friends in Ireland? And when I say really good friends, I guess what I mean is, are there people there that you feel are your people? They're like you.
That is such a good question. And it is difficult for me in a way here, because the way people are is they have this wonderful kind of practical intelligence. But I'm considered probably to be a bit away with the fairies, or is what they describe it, Yeah. So sometimes I do have that feeling that it's hard to communicate because, for that reason. But, the amazingness and kindness and, fantastic, people are fantastic here. But I think when you say that about people who are somehow, like in that way where you can talk about everything and anything, it's a little harder, I think, in some ways. So I have to make sure that when I'm all isolated, and my husband's away, that I don't, I make sure I've still got some of that going, because that's important. I think you don't want to feel that you can't communicate.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So, Amelia, what do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
I know. I had tried to think about that. I think it's about trusting myself, because that's what has for so long kind of eluded me, that sort of, lacking confidence. But I've learned through my work that very much it's to do, if I just... So, for example, if I sit down and I think, right, I'm doing this chapter and I'm doing that or whatever, then I can actually now let myself, if I start to have a different interesting idea about something, I trust myself now to go with that idea, because it will actually bear loads more fruit, and it's a roundabout way to go about things, but it works for me, I think it's that thing where, so that's what I mean about trusting myself in general, because this journey of sort of realizing you know more than you thought you did, and all that sort of thing, really.
Yeah, no, I love it. So you are the best expert on you, period.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, Amelia, where can people find you if they want to know more about you?
Well, I don't do much social media at all, because I just find it a little overwhelming generally. But I have my email address, which is ameliajetherton@gmail.com. And I'm very happy if anyone wants to contact me on that. And there's the website for the B&B, if they want to come and stay. So that's www.pekingcottage.com.
That's wonderful. And so if they want to share something with you or reach out to you, they can do that using your email.
They can, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Amelia, thank you so much for spending time with us here today.
Thank
it was
you,
just
Stacey.
Delightful to talk to you.
Yeah, it was lovely talking to you. And I just think you're doing such good stuff with your podcast. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Amelia, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. And you know what? Your reviews really help in that regard. As always, you're listening to ADHD for Smartass Women. Come join me over at tracyoutsuka.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week. You've been listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Outsuka, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Not coincidentally, ADHD for Smartass Women, it's also the name of our free Facebook group. We're a totally smartass community of successful, ambitious women who share our ADHD wins, questions, and workarounds. Join us at tracyoutsuka.com, where you can also find more information on our Your ADHD Brain is A-OK system. I spy a happier life for us, and I'll see you again next week.